let's talk about Five Nights at Freddy's, the live-action adaptation of the popular game franchise. I'm going to share my thoughts and feelings on the film with spoilers ahead, and I'd love to hear what you thought in the comments. While you're there, be sure to check our link to our second channel, The Horror Exchange, but for now, this is my honest review of Five Nights at Freddy's. It feels like yesterday to me when the first game in the series was released back in 2014, and subsequently its twisted take on fast food chain mascots went on to spawn an entire franchise. A whole series of games, novels, toys. Freddy's World has been opened up and the Fazbear universe has been created. With the amount of love for the series and, more importantly, financial success, it was only a matter of time before a feature film became reality. Well, now it has, for better or worse. I think it completely depends on what your stance is in relation to the franchise to begin with. I've heard from many hardcore fans that they love the film and that it's one more for the fans to enjoy, more so than a wider audience. Which, if that is the case, I find that extremely counterintuitive, because why wouldn't you want to satisfy a wider audience and bring them into investing more in the series? It's a tough divide here, with the critics generally panning the film and audiences being mixed but mostly negative. What do I think though? Well, up front I'll say I'm not a devout Five Nights follower. Sure, I've played the games the odd time here and there, but nothing much more than that. So for me, watching this film was a fresh experience, despite feeling similar to me to Willy's Wonderland and the Banana Splits movie, though admittedly those films came across as byproducts of Five Nights prior to this film being released, so it's an unfair comparison to make. As such, I gave myself up in the mindset of it'll probably be mindless, inconsequential fun that I can just chill to. It's not going to win any awards, but it'll be harmless and I might have a laugh. Actually, what I received here was something I definitely didn't expect. Wow, did this thing take itself more seriously than it should have done. With a concept like Five Nights at Freddy's, there's an acknowledged perception of it being pretty crazy and frightening. The main reason it blew up to begin with was the bright, colourful characters turning sinister and the jump out your seat moments. I think this film failed on those aspects by tapping into a main storyline that did not gel with the aesthetic. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a part of me that respects the creative decision they tried, because they took the original protagonist, Mike Schmidt, played here by Josh Hutcherson, and added a lot to his character. In the first game, very little is known about him, down to the incentives for him actually wanting to work at Freddy Fazbear's as security to begin with. At least in this film, it builds a story for Mike and fleshes him out more. And the fact that the original Five Nights creator Scott Cawthon contributed to the story, screenplay, and production, then at the very least you can respect the creative decisions a bit more. However, what we get with Mike's story is something which felt a lot more adult than the teen horror pull factor Five Nights has. He's essentially a guy who struggles to keep jobs due to a conflicting PTSD inside him, where he lost his brother, Garrett, and subsequently he struggles to live with the grief. On top of this, he's got child custody issues to contend with in relation to his little sister Abby, as he's not seen as fit to raise her by his punchable Aunt Jane. What a bitch she was. Oh, I just wanted to bash her head in. But yeah, overall in terms of backstory, how's that for a slice of horror fun? Anxiety, paranoia, losing a sibling, guilt, personality conflicts, family relationship issues. Isn't that exactly what you expected to unpack in this film? And Christ, does this plot thread go on. There's far too many dream sequences where Mike goes back in his mind to try and change things or seek answers, and I think we must go to the same middle of the woods setup about 5 times in the film. I'm not the biggest advocate for dream sequences anyway, so to receive a large handful of them in the film wasn't something I could stand behind. However, on the flip side, at least it gives us a reason why Mike keeps going back to Fazbear's, because he feels a stronger connection to Garrett and believes he can find some answers as to what happened. It was never really a bad idea to give Mike a film-friendly narrative. In the gaming realm, you can get away with sacrificing character if the gameplay is good. Just look at Jack in BioShock. That is a lot harder to do in film though, because investing in characters is much more important to connect. So fair play for the attempt here. I just think that the tone of what they went for was of a much higher age bracket and sensitivity to the product being adapted. But how's about that gaming half of the puzzle? The representation of the games themselves. How accurate or successful is this film in bringing the vibe of the games to life? Well, I must say, the visuals are brilliant. I think that the restaurant and the animation animatronics were realised amazingly. Bonnie, Foxy, Chica, Freddy, they all looked fantastic and felt like Five Nights at Freddy's in live action. The black and white tiles, the security camera setup, certain posters and lights, it's all iconic stuff that the gaming community will recognise, and here I think that the set designers did such a good job. However, I do think that the atmosphere of the games was mostly lost. This was always going to be a challenge though, because film is a much different medium to games. The fear factor of a first-person survival horror game where you are in control has a much deeper personal connection than witnessing a film play out. This was never going to be as scary as the games, but it did bother me that it didn't feel even slightly scary at all. The kills are awful because you don't bloody see them. You'll get threatening approaches by the animatronics before a cutaway, of course. Yeah, I do get they want to cash in on the name knowing that it has a big audience of younger consumers, but surely a little more graphic horror would have been nice to see, because as it is, it feels rather tame. Not that the games were immensely gory anyway, they relied more on the mood and jump scares, but even here we don't get any proper jump scares. Usually I'm more of a creeped out fan than a jump scare fan, but Five Nights is famous for its jump scares, and we couldn't even get that part of the equation right. So overall, in terms of an adaptation of the games, I think that the visuals were spot on, and there's plenty Easter eggs in there for fans to enjoy, but for both hardcore and more casual watchers, there was a distinct lack of horror elements, and it didn't inspire a memorable experience. At least something like Willy's Wonderland was so mind-blowingly over-the-top mental that I remember it for that. This was much more forgettable and doesn't inspire me to give it a rewatch anytime soon. How's about the lore of the Five Nights universe though? How does that factor in here? Well, I must admit I'm not a bible of knowledge when it comes to the franchise, so there's definitely stuff I'm unaware of, but I do know about bits and pieces that made up the final twist here. So earlier on in the film, Mike meets Vanessa, a young police officer who ends up helping him out, regularly meeting him, with a surprisingly sound knowledge of the Freddy Fazbear's building and history. You're definitely not suspicious, are you? Good job you just casually show up at this abandoned restaurant and have the time every evening to have a nice chinwag. Of course, that's how a casual fan will see it. You know there's more to her. Now in the games, Vanessa is a more recent addition to the franchise, being the protagonist of Help Wanted and the antagonist of Security Breach. Her involvement in those games is rather different to how she ties into the film here. She just presents herself as a police officer, but she winds up having a knowledge of the disappearance of children, including Mike's brother Garrett. Everything comes down to her father, William Afton, who we do see in the film. Matthew Lillard is probably the most fun part about this movie, first playing Mike's career advisor Steve Ragland before being revealed as Afton. Now of course we know Afton is the big bad of the entire Five Nights franchise, and here we get a pretty cool introduction to him as the Yellow Rabbit, Spring Bonnie. Towering tall, looks more threatening than other animatronics. It's such a badass looking character, and I do look forward to seeing Lillard utilised in future films should we receive them. I do find that he's a great versatile actor and that this was a strong casting for the role, especially since he's going through a bit of a renaissance period in his acting career. Side note, I will say I think Hutcherson does a good job as Mike, all things considered, doing well with the material put in front of him. On the whole, I think that 2023's Five Nights at Freddy's isn't that bad of a start for building a series of films. I've seen way worse. There's some things that they fundamentally did get right, but it's the low-level fear factor and horror themes, plus some plot threads that just didn't suit, which made the film a middle-of-the-road experience. It certainly wasn't lackluster. It's worth a watch at the very least, and hopefully sequels can iron out some of the flaws identified. But that's just how I feel about it. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below, and until next time, I'm Connor from Unleash the Ghouls, and I'll be back soon with another honest review. Cheers out.